Daniel from BioSoul Digital, and I'm here at the BioSoul Music Recording Studio in Los Angeles today to talk to you about our new Kontakt instrument, EEYORE. EEYORE is an instrument built entirely on samples of bowed metals, mostly hand-hammered ride cymbals with a touch of bowed vibraphone to give a little extra shimmer. The result is an 88-key, fully playable instrument that feels more like an organic, breathing synthesizer than a traditional sample library. For those of you who are film composers, you're familiar with this technique, but for the rest of you, you can take a string instrument bow, we use double bass bows, and you can bow the side of a cymbal to get really cool textures. Traditionally, it's used for like horror cues, something creepy. You can get a lot of screechy, eerie sounds out of a cymbal, but if you bow it in the right place, you can actually get really beautiful consonant textures. Sometimes it can be just a single overtone frequency that comes out as a single note, or you can get lots of chords. We had some beautiful tenths that we sampled that are throughout this instrument. Sometimes you get more dense polyphonic textures, and then what's really cool is you can actually spin the cymbal and get those textures to evolve as you're bowing the cymbal. So we took full advantage of these techniques to get lots of different textures, sounds, chords, single note things to create a very unique instrument. When you bow a cymbal, the sound blooms, evolves, and sometimes turns polyphonic. And then when you let go, the natural decay of a cymbal sounds like an organic reverb. We originally designed this with film composers in mind, horror cues, evolving pads, but as we kept developing, it quickly revealed itself to be way more versatile. Lo-fi keys patches, dreamy organ soundscapes, and a lot of other sounds that I really don't think you're gonna find anywhere else. All right, I'm excited to introduce you to my friend EEYORE. Let's dive in. So we first open up Kontakt. I'm actually opening it up in complete control, but they function the same way. And you'll see all your different sample libraries here. So we're gonna scroll down and you'll see EEYORE here. So you can click on that square and immediately all the different patches of EEYORE will pop up. So you can pick any one of those right off the bat. And we'll actually talk about NKS integration later in the video. Or you can just hit this little arrow here to pop it up. I already have it open, so we'll just close the library. And here is my friend EEYORE. This is the home page. You'll see right away there's a prompt to drag his head. But we like to just keep it very simple to start. When you first open up EEYORE, it's going to default to this 01 EEYORE init patch, which is a nice little nod to the days of yore with analog synthesizers, where there was always an initialized patch to start. So this is just going to be kind of like the most basic, simple start to the sound of EEYORE. It's actually a patch that I really love, so it's a great place to first get to know the instrument, but certainly things get more complex and go different directions the deeper into the patch list you get. But here is what that first patch sounds like. And then of course, we can't help but notice this prompt. And so you'll see EEYORE's head is a macro that controls a bunch of different stuff. We'll get to exactly what all it does in a little bit, but it's a great way just to start getting beautiful modulation in your instrument right away. And you'll see me dragging his head here, but it's also mapped to the mod wheel. So I'll probably do a lot of mod wheel stuff moving forward just because it's easier to play. And so this patch really, just like listen to it. I'm gonna take the mod wheel off, basically head all the way up. Happy, not that he really looks happy, is macro off. Head all the way down, the most sad, the most melancholy EEYORE is macro all the way up to 100%. So with it fully off, there's your kind of basic patch. I'll turn this back up. And you can hear, there's so much different texture in there. You can hear the actual bow along the cymbal. And you can hear it evolving and mutating. And then it lays really nicely as kind of a pad instrument or a keyboard instrument. And so you can hear in that macro, there's a low pass filter that's coming on. There's some reverb that's blooming. There's some delay that's blooming. We'll get into how you can control that a little more granularly in a minute. But at its core, this is EEYORE. You don't have to do anything else other than just sit down, play, and play with the head, and you can get some really beautiful sounds. Cool, so you've gotten to hear the most basic version of EEYORE. And before we move on, I just want to explain a couple broad concepts that will help you get into the deeper parts of EEYORE a little faster. And the first concept is that for each patch, you have a single sample or a stack of samples, but those samples are stretched across the entire keyboard. So rather than having one sample controlling an octave down here, different sample up here, it's one sample or stacked samples on each other, but they're stretched across the entirety of the keyboard. That doesn't work for every sample-based instrument, but for EEYORE, it ended up being such a cool thing. I loved how these samples evolve and change energies depending on how you're stretching them. So what that means is up at the top of the keyboard, you're going to get these samples to react very differently than they do at the bottom of the keyboard. For example, this init patch at the very top, it's very glassy, very fluty, kind of reminds me of an ocarina. It's really cool, and then I really love the top end of most of the EEYORE patches when you bring the head down and you really get some low pass on it and you get a lot of bloom in there. And then if you go down to the bottom, we're really stretching these samples. They're moving very slowly, and you can get some really cool textures, especially for film composers, by just going down here. I'll drop it down an octave even and check this out. It's going to evolve, but it's going to evolve really, really slowly. So you can just use this as a tension cue in and of itself and let that just ride for a while. I love that. And you're hearing, again, a lot of that sort of breathy noise up at the top. That is the sound of the bow on the cymbal. And I just love how it makes it feel so organic and so much like an acoustic instrument. It's very oceanic to me. So I think that works really nicely for certain film scoring applications. But I'm sure you can think of lots of different reasons and ways to use that. Another concept that's important to understand is that the head macro doesn't uniformly affect every patch the same way. We'll get into the settings in a little bit, but the head is going to take on different characteristics depending on which patch we're on. You can turn off some of those in the settings, but just don't expect it to uniformly act the same way every time. And I think that's really fun and really cool. Another concept is pitch bend. You can really use the pitch bend for a lot of interesting effects. It's a full octave pitch bend. I think really gets into some old feeling analog synthesis with that. If you drop the head, at least on this patch, there's some cool delay with it, so you can do some really cool things with pitch bend and delay. Have fun with that. And I think the last concept that's important to understand is that we chose to sample these cymbals in a way that is pristine from a recording standpoint, but isn't always going to sound pristine from an execution standpoint. And that's because we had close mics, really capturing those horsehairs on the cymbal. We wanted all of that grit and the granular energy of it and the organicness of it. So if you're looking for something really clean, you're going to have to scan a little deeper into the patch list. There are some that work really nice and clean. Sometimes you just want to low pass things a little bit to help it out. There's not a high pass on EEYORE. There's some reasons behind that, but you can easily in a DAW or in complete control just throw on a low pass if it's just getting a little too much low end buildup for you. But for now, know that the head with settings, we can turn on and off the filter. So we could just go ahead from this point, pick another patch. I really love this DX8 patch. You'll notice just, anytime you switch a patch, you're going to have to get the mod wheel to resync to it for a second. Otherwise, here, I'll show you. Otherwise, the head's in one place, the mod wheel's in another. And so you're going to hear it jump there for a second. It's always good just really quickly when you pick a new patch to hit the mod wheel just to get it back where it needs to be. Unless you just don't want to touch it at all and it'll be in the place where it starts. So yeah, here's this DX8 patch. Lovely kind of bell tones, works as a really nice keyboard instrument. Yeah, here, let's go through one more. I like this octavizer patch. Hear everything drop down the octave here in a second. good example of one that you'll actually notice the mod wheel is going to look a little broken. I promise you it's not. We'll get to the settings a little later and this will explain everything. But for now, I would love to go back here and we're going to go to the browser page and explain this. So as you've seen, there are a couple different ways to get to patches. There's obviously the snapshots within Kontakt. You can do the same in Complete Control. You can go back to the library and see all the patches here. But I built a custom patch browser that I think is going to be really helpful as you get to know EEYORE in particular. So what you're going to see here, there's kind of 4 sections to this, 2 main sections. Over here on the right is the actual full patch list. So you can just scroll down here. There are little arrow keys if you just want to go down one at a time. And then over here is a full filter bank. And so we're going to use that to be able to kind of hone in on what kind of patch you're looking for. And that's broken down into 3 parts. On the left here in the kind of pinkish, we have the types of patches. A lot of these patches sort of function in multiple ways. But as best as I could, I tried to put things in categories so you can find that and it would work that way. So we have bass, we have keys, we have some lead patches. There aren't a lot of lead patches in EEYORE, but there's some cool ones I think that you'll be intrigued by. Lots of pads and then lots of sound effects as well. Then next to that in the blue, we have a feeling. So these are very subjective, of course, but this is a way to kind of hone in on, am I looking for something a little more in that horror creepy vein? Or am I looking for something that's a really chill atmosphere ambient thing? Or this pop one right here, that's going to get you more in the lane for producers to get kind of playable keyboard instruments, some things that might work better in a lo-fi production setting or an R&B neo-soul kind of production setting. I'm sure there are lots of other ways to use EEYORE, but that's going to kind of get you into at least like the recorded music realm rather than the film music realm. And then over here on the right in the left, we have function. So that's going to get you just a little more specifically like, am I looking for a simple patch where it doesn't evolve as much? It kind of stays in one place. Am I looking for a complex patch where it's constantly evolving and changing? We'll get to some more of those in a little bit. We have reverse patches. I'll also explain reversing patches a little more, but those are ones that start in reverse. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So an easy way to use this, let's say I am a lo-fi producer. I'm looking for just like a nice little keys patch for that. So I would click keys. Maybe I'd click pop just to get some other stuff out of the way. And then let's say I'm looking for like a reverse sound. All of a sudden we're down to 2, right? So let's open up this Billy's B3. I really love this patch. Reminds me a lot of my Hammond organ that I have back there. And you can hear it right here. Hear a ton of air in that noise. We're going to get to how you can get some of that out in a little bit. But that air is actually, you're just hearing the bow go through it, right? So I really embrace that. I love it. It gives it this very ethereal kind of woodwindy, organy, like a pipe organ pushing air through something. And there is a way to low pass that so you can take some of that out. Let's try this one more time. Let's say we're going for a sound effect. We're looking for something creepy. We're looking for something that really keeps evolving. And now you can see here, we're already down to just a handful of patches. This one's really fun. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. I forgot to grab the mod wheel before here, so let's just go back. And then you can just let it fade with EEYORE's head. You get some really cool saturation there at the end. I actually didn't have to go back to the homepage for that. It's a little hard to grab when you have the patch browser here, but EEYORE's head is always active and grabbable from behind any page that you're in. So if you're deft with your mouse, I could have just gone and grabbed his head right there. Cool, so that's how the patch browser works. You can always unclick something if you want to broaden your scope again. The clear button is going to fully just start you back from scratch. And hopefully this will help you just at least be able to narrow down as you're first getting to know all these patches. And then if you have a patch that you love and you want to change the settings, you can always use the snapshots in Kontakt to save your own patches or to save your own snapshots versions of these patches. And that can be just as simple as you like EEYORE's head somewhere else, and then you save that as a different snapshot, or we'll go into the settings and then you can get a lot more complicated in how you're saving those. One last little thing of note with the patch browser, you'll notice you're always going to see what patch you're on up here at the top in blue, even if the patch list has fully reset. You're going to notice that the snapshots don't change. That is by design. So once you get into using this user interface patch browser, just ignore the snapshots because they're going to reflect not using this browser. On the flip side, if you use the snapshots, it will line up with here until we use this differently. Yeah, let's dive into the settings page. This is really going to get you a lot more control of all these patches. And I'll just start top to bottom, left to right. So at the very top here, we have this LFO, and the LFO is directly tied to EEYORE's head, right? So we can move the mod wheel, or we can drag his head with our mouse. And the second you turn on the LFO, that's going to disconnect your ability to move the head manually because he's going to start headbanging. And so he will do that. And it's such a cool way to create modulation with that head macro. And I really like to think of this LFO more like a vibrato. I really love a good analog vibrato that you can control. So that is why this is not tempo synced. If you want to tempo sync it, by all means, you can just draw in some automation of the head into your DAW on the grid. That works fine. But I think thinking of this less as sort of what you would do with an LFO in electronic music, and much more like a vibrato that you'd put on an organ. Or I have, if anybody knows the Fairfield Electronics Randy's Revenge pedal, it's a ring modulator, but I really like to use it really subtly as a vibrato, and that's a lot of how I would use this LFO. You'll notice right now it's at the top, and so you're probably not going to hear a lot of that as much. And so if you wanted to hear more of it, I would just turn up the amplitude for a second, catch him at the bottom of his head moving, and then we can get that a little lower. That's the LFO in a nutshell. I think you noticed just because I've been dragging it, but EEYORE's head again is always controllable from here. So you can dial things in and drag or mod wheel and still see him. So moving down, we have the EEYORE effects, and these are all going to be effects that are directly linked to the head macro. The one thing that's sort of not in here is there's a little bit of saturation that builds up as he drops his head. But at its most basic thing, if the head is all the way down and the macro is at 100%, you're going to be getting 100% of wherever each of these effects are at. So we have a reverb send, we have a delay send where you can control the time and the feedback, and then there's also this filter. So if the filter bypass is off, you're going to get that low pass, right? And then if the filter bypass is on, you're going to get, let me turn that down a little bit, you're going to get all the rest of what the head controls, but no low pass filter. So that allows you to be able to control a filter on the back end in a DAW, or if you just like the sound without the filter, that opens it up. You're going to notice certain patches naturally default to having the filter bypass on because we really like a lot of the texture that comes from that and wanted the head macro to do everything else it controls without having the low pass. You can always turn that on and off and play around with it. And so actually I'm going to keep that filter bypass on for a second as I explain the rest of these. So we'll have the head all the way down here still, and let's turn the reverb down. Let's turn the delay feedback down. And now you're hearing the sound of the head without any of the rest of that. It's going to be pretty subtle without them. But now we can just turn up a reverb send. Really nice. If we turn reverb all the way down, and then let's just set a delay time, kind of fun. You can get some really long delays in here, which is really cool. We can have just a little delay, or we can get a lot of delay. And you can even go over 100%. Please use this carefully, but it can make for some really fun stuff. And then you have to turn that off. The head is not going to change that after the delay has already started. It's just a send to the delay. And so if we have that in there, we can also have these really nice long delays. I love being able to play with the time so you can get some really cool stuff there. And as I mentioned before, you can get some really cool pitch delay stuff. There you go. Let's just reset that patch, and then you can just control the amount with that head macro, which is just a really ideal blend of whatever you want. But by all means, turn that reverb send up all the way and still control it with EEYORE's head. Cool. So we're going to go ahead and move our way over to the other side here. Let's change patches here. This is my favorite use case for using the snapshots, is if I just want to kind of quickly scan through stuff while I'm in the settings page, because otherwise to use the patch browser, you'd have to go back home and then go to the browser. So we'll just pick, actually this chrysalis patch is really fun. And so a couple things I can point out. Here is a reverse patch, right? So you're going to hear that is one of our samples in reverse. And if you play a low sample that's reversed, it's really going to take a while to open up, depending on the patch. And so if you wanted to hear that same sample or set of samples in forward, just turn the reverse off. And you're going to notice there are a ton of different sound sources within EEYORE, but some of the patches are versions of other patches in reverse with maybe some other things stacked on top of it. So the only time you're going to hear like really similar things is if you turn the reverse off or turn the reverse on, and it may sound like one other patch in EEYORE to an extent. There's always going to be changes in that. But let's turn reverse back on. And you can do this to any one of the patches. The B3 is also a lovely reverse patch. I love that. That's really cool. And so you'll notice that some of these patches in the original sound source, if we're starting all the way at the beginning of the file, it actually takes a while for the cymbal to really kind of warm up and get sound out of it. So all you're going to hear to start is that kind of brush against metal. And then the sound comes in. And so sometimes actually you're going to get more tonality faster on a reverse patch. So if I sort of went in reverse order, no pun intended, if you look up top here, there's this infinity symbol. And so what that's going to do, if it's off, any one of our samples is going to play start to finish in its entirety, which is really cool. But if you were playing something way up here and something way down here, this sample is going to finish a lot faster than this sample. There are a lot of use cases actually where I really love that, especially in the film scoring context. But if you want something that plays more like a keyboard and it's just going to hold as long as you hold your fingers down, then what you can do is turn on this loop button. The patch is going to start the same, but then it's going to find a loop point within the sample so that you can just hold it down as long as you want. What you'll notice is some of these looped patches don't evolve quite as much because we're picking a specific section of the sound source rather than letting the whole thing bloom. And some of these samples last like 2 to 3 minutes, depending on where you're holding them. So that's going to give you less modulation, but especially in sort of more of a pop context, that's going to be a lot more useful, I think. And you're still getting lots of modulation in there. Cool. And then down below that, we have a tape button. That is tape saturation. There's a tiny bit of wow and flutter on it. Probably not enough to really notice, but it's just giving a little extra analog loveliness. So that's going to be on by default on a lot of these patches, certainly on that EEYORE init patch. You're going to hear that right away. I'll turn it off now. You hear things get a little cleaner, a little prettier, but also just doesn't have all that lovely warmth on the bottom. Where I think turning this off is going to be the most helpful, you'll hear it actually on this init patch. If you're holding a lot of like a chord down low, you're going to start to get a lot of saturated buildup on the bottom. Sorry, let me lower the head. There you can hear it on the bottom, right? And so if that's just a little too grainy, a little too much saturation for you, turn off that tape and it's going to be nice and clean. It's going to be a little quieter too. The saturation does naturally have a little bit of extra gain to it, but you can certainly turn your gain up. Let's get to the attack and release. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but it's a really powerful tool with EEYORE. Let's find a good example. All right, Glorious Glitches is a great one. This is a pretty fast attack, slow release, and you'll hear that. I just tapped that note, and you're still getting a lot of bloom right away, right? So if we turn our attack all the way down, let's get the release really low. Could be really cool for some arpeggiated stuff. Right? And then if we get that release up a little bit, and maybe turn the attack down or up just a little bit. The faster attack, slower releases, I think naturally are going to lend themselves a little more to the pop context, to keyboard contexts, and then a slow attack, slower release is really great for kind of a slow building film score, film cue kind of thing. Like, let's even drop this 2 octaves. Check this out. We could even further back off that attack. Just hear it slowly creep in. And if we had turned that LFO off, you could really get that to creep in. There's some really cool buildup on the bottom there. That's a good example of one of these patches where you're just going to get a lot of buildup if you're holding multiple notes of low stuff. So you might have to high pass it a touch, or you love it. I love it. Just listen to that patch, just keeps growing and evolving and getting all these cool kind of natural risers built into it. And we've been probably listening to this long enough, although it just keeps getting cooler. One little minor caveat, I'll see if I can fix this in future iterations. It's surprisingly complicated in here. But once you've started a note, you're not going to be able to change the release of that until you start a new note again. So here before, I had let that go. I had changed the release after starting a note. And so you just heard wherever the release was when I started that note. So in order to get a release all the way up, I have to start a new note. And now we're going to get a really, really long release. Perhaps a little too long. So this is good for any of you to know who are new to Native Instruments stuff. If you just hit this exclamation mark, it's instantly going to kill everything. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just going to pull us back to the home page, kill all the samples, and you'll still be right back where you started. So that's pretty much EEYORE in a nutshell. I'd love to just walk you through a few more patches so you can kind of hear how it can evolve and change and what all it has under its hood. But it's really quite simple, right? And yet so robust and can take on so many different shapes even with these simple settings. I wanted to make it really easy to use, really easy to access, and still have just a ton of sonic possibility. So that's actually going to be it for this video. We decided to break it up into 2 parts to make it a little more digestible. So if you want to click up here for part 2, I'm going to walk you through more patches and sounds from EEYORE and also walk you through the entire NKS hardware integration of EEYORE through Native Instruments' native control standard. In the meantime, feel free to reach out with any questions if you go to our website, www.biosouldigital.com. That's where you can purchase EEYORE. You can listen to more examples of how to use EEYORE. There's a great FAQ on the site as well. And if you want to follow us on our socials, everything is at BioSoul Digital. We're having some really fun ways to show different applications of EEYORE, doing some giveaways as well. And we do have more instruments in the works, so you can find out about those on our socials or on our website. You can join our mailing list. Once again, my name is Daniel. Thanks so much for joining us here at BioSoul Music Recording Studio. For BioSoul Digital, signing off, and be sure to check out part 2.